Hi, this is the Kid here at Red Gaming Tech, and today we're going to be taking a look at a game that has been around for a little while on mobile platforms of various flavours, but has only recently arrived on Windows and OS X. The game we're going to be taking a look at is Trickster Arts' game Hero of Many. So Trickster Arts, to give you a bit of history, is formed from some former 2K Czech employees who have gotten together to form this new company, Trickster Arts. And Hero of Many is kind of their first major game. So for those unfamiliar, the game originated as a concept called Hero and was kind of teased around a bit as a new sort of entry in this sort of minimalistic genre, shall we say. It's not a game I'd played back on the mobile days, so I came into this kind of as a complete newcomer to the game. I'm going to start with my initial sort of impressions and opinions on what I felt just diving into this game completely unversed in its kind of nuances, and the sort of the minimalist genre as a whole isn't something I've really dabbled in before, so this was kind of my first experience of it. So I'm going to talk you through a little bit about how I felt going into the game. So jumping into the game sight unseen, I did kind of feel an air of confusion and slight disorientation, I suppose would be the term for it. The game centres around a pretty simple mechanic. Your player character is essentially a little ball or sphere type thing, and the game centres around exploring this minimalistic environment and tracking down these little sperm type creatures that I presume they're supposed to represent fish, but they do look quite zygote-like. Maybe it's just the way they're drawn, maybe I have a dirty mind, I don't know, but that was my kind of initial thought on what these things looked like. And it's very sparing in its explanation of what it is the game actually expects of you. It took me a good 20 minutes of running around these sort of maze-like environments, trying to find these little white fish to come and join me in whatever cause it was my character was pursuing. And I feel like the game could have used a much, maybe not a much more, but at least it needs to throw you a bone is the best term I can come up with. Going in completely not knowing what this game's about, I was immediately lost and immediately a little bit confused as to what it is I needed to do. So after a little bit of running around this sort of maze, I'd amassed a nice group of these white fish that would follow me around. I would occasionally encounter blackfish, and since they seemed to be hostile, I sort of, through trial and error, figured out that I could have my little whitefish kill the blackfish, or the blackfish would try and kill the whitefish. But there still wasn't much of a clear objective other than navigate the maze, build up a sort of posse of whitefish, go and kill some blackfish, and try and find the level exit. And the level design is difficult to navigate, is the term I would jump to. The game does make an attempt to kind of give the player an indication of where they've been, with kind of a mechanic where every so often in a new area you will activate a small light that kind of stays there permanently. And I get the impression that those lights are there within the environment to give the player an indication that they've been to an area before, but it still doesn't really help when you're hopelessly lost, walking around, sometimes for large numbers of minutes, trying to find where it is you need to go, because you've gotten hopelessly lost within this kind of unstructured, maze-like level. And dotted around each level there are checkpoints, which are represented by kind of large crystals that light up when you touch them, meaning that if you die you can restart from that point. But there was no prompt to indicate that those were checkpoints, which is another kind of slight niggle I had about this game, was that there isn't a lot of explanation as to what's actually going on. So initially you'll be wandering around, you'll encounter one of these crystals, touch it, it lights up. Now, there's not really an indication that saved your progress, so you're kind of left wondering, well, what have I just done by lighting up this crystal? Have I opened a doorway somewhere, or, have I now gained some kind of new ability? And that's all left up to the player to figure out, ultimately. There are a few occasions where the game will prompt you to say, if you hold this button and press this button, you can perform this action, so you can have your minions sort of rush forward. But again, I didn't actually find much of a use for that ability, other than moving some of the sort of shiftable rocks around. It doesn't seem to have much effect in combat that you can have your minions rush, and I found that combat was something that was very, very confusing, and in fact it's more a lack of combat. I did feel like the player's actions during these sort of battles with little black captains or the other sort of bosses that come later in the game, it feels like the players input and actions don't really have much of a bearing, which is slightly off-putting because you'll find yourself rushing around the environment or the sort of area you're in, desperately trying to avoid getting munched by the blackfish, while your minions will sort of swarm around you seemingly randomly, and it's kind of hard to tell whether you can actually prompt them to attack or not. So it does kind of have a feeling of randomness in terms of what effect your input is actually having, if any at all. One of the game's major strong points is its audio design. It has a haunting orchestral score that kind of pervades through the entire environment, and a lot of the sound design, and right down to the little noises that happen when the fish interact with objects or when the little lights light up or you reach a checkpoint, are very sort of aquatic in feel, and it gives kind of a very dreamlike feel to the entire situation and experience. The one downside to this is that there were a number of points where I would find myself lost in a level, and during that time you can notice that there are some slightly jarring loop points in the music, and it kind of can descend into a bit of a background drone during periods where you're trying to figure out where it is you need to go, or how to defeat a particular enemy, or solve a particular little puzzle involving these movable objects and things like that. So overall it was an incredibly strong audio performance, for want of a better term, but there were these little points where you would notice when like a track was looping, or you would notice that you'd heard the same piece of a track multiple times during one section. So discounting those little niggles, the audio is definitely one of the game's key strong points, and was something that impressed me greatly. The game also handles and controls incredibly fluidly and intuitively, and you never feel like you're kind of being victimized by the controls, or you're losing or dying because the controls have stiffed you over somehow. You always feel in control of your character, despite the sort of very deliberate floaty feel of the whole sort of movement of your character and your minions that follow you around. The game kind of has a feel that it's very accessible, and you can very much just pick up and play it as an experienced player of games, or someone who's new to the whole concept of gaming. During my testing of the game, and for the footage that you're watching, I was using an Xbox 360 controller on my PC. I haven't tried the game with the sort of standard PC controls, but I did find that it did kind of lend itself very well to a controller setup where the movement is all controlled with the left stick and you use your triggers for some abilities. The layout was pretty logical, and the game handled very well. So overall I'd say the controls again were well designed, well thought out, and never really a hindrance to your enjoyment of the game. In all, to kind of summarise, the game does have a very sort of dreamlike feel, and is definitely very much a part of the minimalist genre of games. It definitely feels like an experience I'd like to explore further. You do feel drawn in by the sense of mystery surrounding what is your character's situation and what your objective is in this abstract world, but I do find that it's a hindrance to getting really involved, in that the game doesn't give you much information at the outset as to what is overall going on in this situation, and a lot is left up to your interpretation and imagination. And I do feel like imagination is a key skill that this game requires of a player. That said, it's always a positive thing to see an alternative manner of storytelling and a game that doesn't hand you everything on a plate. But overall, I just wish the game had handed you slightly more to avoid these situations where you feel hopelessly lost and a little bit detached from the narrative, in that you feel you're lacking information that you really need to understand what's happening. In terms of whether I'd recommend the game to other players, I would say it very much comes down to an individual's ability and willingness to put effort into understanding the situations in the game and the storyline, as the game really doesn't spoon feed you the information that you're really ultimately attempting to gain by playing it. It's definitely a game that requires effort to become fully engaged with, but you are rewarded with quite a moving story told in a way you wouldn't normally expect. And I would say that the game's shortcomings in terms of how much it is willing to help you play the game and how much information it's willing to give you far from outweigh the positive experience you'll have and the emotions you will feel while you're playing the game. In all, Hero of Many is a slightly flawed game that has clearly had a lot of love put into it, and that love really shows through in the overall execution of the game, and the reward to the player is an experience of the road less travelled in terms of narrative and storytelling. Ultimately, that's all I can really say about the game without having you play it yourself, because it really is a subjective experience and different people will gain different things from it. I'd recommend definitely checking it out. It's currently available for around $4.99 on most platforms, including Steam, which is the platform that I purchased the game from. The price of entry is definitely a small one, considering the rewards you'll get from playing the game. As to whether that purchase is justified, that's a decision I have to leave for you. This is the Kid at Red Gaming Tech. Thank you for joining me for this look into the world of Hero of Many, and I will see you next time.